Welcome to one more edition of Politics Done Right. I'm here with Eleanor Goldfield, who is a creative activist, a poet, a writer, a journalist, a singer. She's just an old dissident from Washington, D.C. Eleanor, how are you doing today?
I'm good, man. How are you?
I am doing fine. I'm going through and I'm watching all this impeachment stuff, all this Biden stuff. And then last night I came across your latest post on Act Out. And folks, for those of you who don't know, before we get started, let's get a plug for your Act Out because I love your commentary. I love the research that you do on that stuff, and you've always been great at it. So give us a little plug on that.
Thank you. I appreciate it. So I have a show that airs online and on Free Speech TV. It's called Act Out. It comes out once a week, and you can get it in podcast form, but you can also get it in video form, and you can find all of that information via my website at artkillingapathy.com.
artkillingapathy.com, and it's right there on the screen for you to see, folks. Anyhow, I started to listen to your last post, and you kind of came out with some of the same conclusions that I came out with on the impeachment. So I said, you know what? I want my audience to kind of merge with your audience and for you to inform them on your take on what's going on right now with the Trump impeachment, etc.
Yeah, so I think that the basic foundation here is that we all want Trump to be held accountable for something, right? For anything.
Mm-hmm.
But that's not what's going to happen here. This is a political tit for tat sort of sandbox game between the elites. It has nothing to do with the right of the people to choose their governors. It has nothing to do with the right of the people to hold their governors accountable. It has nothing to do with that. It's basically a way for the Democrats to shift the focus away from actual important issues like Medicare for all, like education, like the climate crisis. They need a way to avoid the things that people actually care about. And interestingly enough, in a poll before most of this media frenzy started, most people said that they are not interested in an impeachment because guess what? That doesn't help you pay your bills. It doesn't raise your minimum wage. It doesn't do anything that people really are craving right now. And it just once again shows that the Democrats are not interested in actually dealing with corruption, because if they were, then they would address the whole Biden thing, really. But they're not. And so all they're looking to do is avoid being accountable to the people and hopefully make it to 2020. And they don't actually care if Trump wins 4 more years in office because they'd rather have 4 more years of Trump than somebody like a Bernie Sanders.
When you said that, it was like ding, ding, ding. Because, a few months back, I'm also a contributing editor at Daily Kos, and I wrote this front page article, and I said, forget about impeachment. What we want to do is go ahead and start talking to people about what are the things that we are going to do for them. Because people, the millennials right now are stuck with a debt that they're probably never going to get out of. We also have the Medicare for all issue, as you mentioned before, and I can talk to you about how that really affects people. I have done some blogs where I show that our medical system is nothing more than a wealth transfer agent to a few. And a lot of people don't get it. They just think, I got a raise, and our raises, we just got a raise today. And the system just takes it back from you because, okay, we gave you a raise, but your health care costs more. We gave you a raise, but everything costs more so that we can get a bigger piece of the pie. So later on, I made a change and I said, okay, yeah, impeach the guy just to leave the mark. But we know that he's going to stay in office. But here's the kicker. Go ahead and campaign like hell. Guess what we're talking about only right now?
Mm-hmm. Exactly. And I think the other important point there is that when you impeach somebody, they're not removed from office. I think that's a common misunderstanding that people have.
Right.
The way this works is that the House inquiry can vote for impeachment. The House can vote for impeachment. Then it goes to the Republican-controlled Senate. And do we really think that Mitch McConnell's not going to drag Biden through the mud for this whole corruption with his son, making $50,000 a month for being on the board of an energy company in Ukraine when he has no history of energy or the Ukraine? I mean, you don't think that the Senate is going to have a field day with this? And hypothetically, in some wonderful world where you actually get an impeachment vote in the Senate, congrats on President Pence. I mean,
I am
look,
so I am so glad you brought that up because how different is Pence again? Or
he's
what is he
worse
gonna bring?
because if you look at Pence, he actually knows the system very well. He knows how
Right.
to play the game much better than Trump does. Trump makes deep state people nervous because he doesn't have any idea how to play the game. He's such a loose cannon. Pence knows exactly how everything works. He's willing to play that game while being that right wing extremist that he is. So to me, that's even more dangerous.
Yeah, I mean, there's no doubt about that. So I am sitting down there thinking, in going through the machinations, we know that Biden's son, well, vis-a-vis Biden, they're corrupt. I mean, that fifth, you talk about, he doesn't know anything about energy, so why is he making, why is he there in the first place? My thing is, who the hell deserves $50,000 a month? Okay, my thing isn't even if he's qualified. I mean, we already have a lot of CEOs that don't know what the hell they're doing right now, and they're making millions. But in this
Yep.
case, it was clear that there's a similarity between using Ukraine for your betterment. In other words, using your political affiliation to get something with Ukraine. And when Trump is hitting that and staying on that, my thing is like, people, don't you see what is happening? There's really not a lot of difference.
Right. And it's like we can get mad at Trump for telling Zelensky that he needs to look into this, but then you should also be angry about the underlying corruption of the situation. You should also be angry that the Obama administration linked arms with fascists to overthrow the government of the Ukraine. You should be angry about all of that. And what that basically leads to is not an impeachment of Trump, but it leads to an impeachment of the entire system.
The
And that's a
system, right?
conversation worth having.
Now, what is interesting, Eleanor, is I've always been on this kick about independent media because right now, what you and I are talking about here, you will not see this conversation on our most supposedly liberal station, meaning MSNBC or any other, because most Americans are just fed with the lollipop, right? In other words, we're just given a little taste of, oh, it's this versus that. Not understand. I mean, today I put a post on my blog saying, hey, we're being scammed. We're being scammed. And the thing about it is, the only thing that's going to save us is kind of the stuff that we're doing here, real grassroots movement and in the somebody that has some independence in taking the media. One of the reasons I've said all the time that I like to listen to your stuff is that you actually go ahead and bring some research and bring people into the fold that generally are not there. Yesterday we had what's his name on Palast. I don't know if you know who Palast is. Greg
Sure, yeah.
Palast on. We had Greg Palast on. Palast looked to me and he said, I don't know why I am not on in the Times. I don't know why I am not on the Washington Post, or he doesn't call it MSNBC. He calls it MSDNC. He said, I don't know why I'm not there. And why is it that I have to go to The Guardian? Why is it that I have to go to Amy Goodman on Democracy Now? I think it is, it's a responsibility of ours, those of us in the know, to do exactly what we're doing, trying to tell folks how things really are.
Yeah, and it's media literacy is a huge issue in this country, and I think it also falls on media consumers, which includes you and I. I mean, we're media creators, but we're also consumers. We have to do, we all have to continuously do a job of finding the news that's behind the corporate media headlines, right? Because if you were to look at our headlines right now, you'd think that the only thing going on in this world is the impeachment frenzy. But that's obviously not the case, right? The wars that we're perpetuating around the world are still ongoing. People are suffering and dying because of our wars, be they economic or otherwise. The climate is in a total state of chaos. I mean, there's so much going on that needs to be covered that's not being covered. And it's not going to be covered by the corporate media because they are beholden. They're basically the stenographers for the State Department. They're basically mouthpieces for the deep state and for the people that are entrenched in those power positions. So it falls on us to create that content, but it also falls on, your viewers and listeners, and the viewers and listeners that are searching for something else because they smell that something's not right. It falls on them and us as well as media consumers to always look for those deeper stories than the truths behind the headlines.
Yeah, it's kind of ironic that we have so many cable news stations right now. We have so much time to put so much content in. And what we find is a loop that's generally American centric news that affects well, actually, it does affect a lot of the world, but not in the form that it should when there's much happening. I mean, how quickly did Venezuela fall off of the radar, and those people are still suffering at the behest of an embargo that others would consider reasons for war. I mean, if right now the only reason we're not really having any serious embargo, let's say on North Korea or these other places, is guess what? They've got the bomb.
Well, and the only reason that we haven't gone to actual war, and I say that economic warfare, we shouldn't call it sanctions, because sanctions, according to the
Exactly.
UN, have to be voted on by the UN Security Council, and they have not voted on our blockade of Cuba, or they've actually voted against it.
Hmm.
They have not voted for sanctions on Venezuela or Iran either. So really what we should call these is economic warfare. And actually there was a report done by the Economic Policy Institute that showed that at least 40,000 Venezuelans have died because of our economic warfare. So those are war numbers right there. That's not just an economic blip. Those are numbers that you would expect in a war. And the only reason that we haven't gone further to actually boots on the ground and things like that is because Russia and China have made it very clear, don't.
I'm so happy you found out. I interviewed the Colombian ambassador a few months ago, and I brought up Abrams with him. You know who Abrams is, right? So they formed a Latin American group that was supposed to try to take out Maduro. And I asked him, by the way, who is the head of that group? Oh, this is solely Latin American. I'm Panamanian. I'm from Latin America. This is solely Latin American. I know it's BS, but it's solely Latin America. So I looked at him and I said, hey, by the way, when was the last time you had a little talk with Abrams? And then he kind of backed off. And I call Abrams by a certain name. And he said, come on, man, you're putting me in Spanish. No, he said, come on, man, you're putting me in a bad spot. So,
Good for you.
but not completely good for me, because what I did, I mean, I cut a little piece out of my video, because again, the guy gave the interview and he slipped up, and I wanted to do the right thing. I don't know if you would have done it or not, but I
Well,
wanted to
that's
do
the question: is the right? I guess it depends on what the right thing is.
well.
Is the right
I
thing?
don't think you would agree with it. You wouldn't have done it. I know you too well. You wouldn't have done it. I did it for, well, I did it. I did it.
Yeah.
I did it. But anyhow, so I mean, what was quite obvious then was that there is a whole lot of America trying to overthrow what's going on down there and otherwise, and we don't talk about it anymore because we failed. Actually, what happened in Venezuela is we failed, and you mentioned two other countries, China and Russia. You better not go in there and that oil, that Venezuelan oil belongs to us all, China, Russia, or rather I should say the EU and America. You better not go in there and take it, right?
Well, and the same holds true for Iran. I mean, also just Venezuela and Iran both have very large armies, and Venezuela actually has a militia that's
Right,
larger than our entire military. So that is something that we are also reckoning with. And Iran is certainly not Iraq when it comes to the size of
right.
their military and the advancement of their weaponry. But the same holds true there. Russia and China have also basically said, don't go to war with Iran. That's not going to end well for you. And it wouldn't end well for us even if they weren't involved because of the size of Iran's military.
Right.
And they're a 2,000 plus year old nation. They're dealing with us like we're some sort of petulant child. We've been through a lot. So we're
Oh
not
my.
they're not going to fold to our petulance.
I like that. We are but a petulant child. Yeah, I mean, and Trump puts it on, puts the exponent onto that, doesn't he?
Hmm.
Yeah, but anyhow, so coming back to the United States of America and back to our election, Eleanor, where do we stand?
Well, I think to me the whole issue with the elections, with any presidential elections in this two party slash one party system, really, is the problem that a vote is only as good as the threat given if you don't get what you want. So to me, voting is an ultimatum. It's saying this is what we the people want. If you don't deliver, there are going to be consequences. And I'm not saying violent consequences.
Right.
I'm saying consequences in terms of political action. And I think the problem is that a lot of people cast a vote and then forget about it. But
Exactly.
that's not good enough, particularly when we recognize. And I had Nick Brana, who's the founder of Movement for a People's Party, on my show, and he worked with Bernie Sanders in 2016. And he's created this great slideshow of how the Democrats stole the primary from Bernie last time and how they're going to do it again. And they've actually made it even more difficult for an actual progressive voice to make it in the Democratic Party. So I think that we have to be very honest about that and say, okay, if we're going to go that route with the Dems, then we have to be very clear about the ultimatum that we're giving them and saying that if you don't let a progressive voice in, then we are going to break your party apart. And that has to be a very clear ultimatum. It can't be just some protests and then we forget about it and we accept Biden or something. That can't be what we do. We have to look beyond the ballot box, particularly when we recognize how corrupt that ballot box is. And no, that's not Russia's fault. That's the US fault. We rig our own elections to such an astronomical extent. So I think we have to be very honest about that and very clear about what we have to do outside of the voting system.
I am so happy that you said that after we vote, we have to ensure that, first of all, that we get a progressive voice in there. And if we don't get that progressive voice in there, we act accordingly, including being ready to split.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Correct? So, Eleanor, Bernie Sanders just had some health problems. How are people in the field kind of taking that right now? Is it something that, I mean, stents are common. I mean, people put stents in all the time. So, I mean, I don't know. What are your thoughts?
Well, yeah, I think that it's not a it's an invasive procedure, but I think he's going to be okay. But I think the bigger question is whether people are actually feeling that he's the best choice. I think a lot of people feel disillusioned by him falling in line behind Clinton in 2016. I think a lot of people also feel very uncomfortable with his foreign policy. For instance, Vermont is a big producer of the F-35, and he's been very pro on that. He's also been very wishy-washy on the whole boycott, divest, and sanctions movement with regards to the apartheid state of Israel. And as a fellow Jew, I get it. You have those struggles in your head, but at the end of the day, Israel is an apartheid state, and it's not. We have to make the differentiation between being Jewish and the Israeli state. That's
Why did
very
you do that to me? Why did you do that to me? I thought I was about to come to the closure, and you bring that into the game. Talk to me as a Jew. In other words, what should I am very careful these days because, again, as a non-Jew, one has to be careful as far as what is taken out of context. How should we really handle that movement, and how should we really talk about Israel as progressive activists? Because right now the right is trying to impose their racist being, if you will, on the left for taking these positions.
Absolutely. Anti-Semitism is kind of like when you say something negative about Hillary Clinton, you're sexist, or if you say something bad about Obama, you're racist. And I think it's very important that we make that distinction. For instance, we should talk about how horrific Saudi Arabia is, but Saudi Arabia is not horrific because it's Muslim, because it's a Muslim state. It is horrific because it's Saudi Arabia.
Right.
And it's important to recognize that there are millions of Muslims worldwide that think what Saudi Arabia is doing is abhorrent. And the same thing goes for Israel. There are so many Jews inside of Israel and outside that think what the Israeli government is doing is horrible. So we really have to be clear about that distinction. And as people on the left, if you're not Jewish, you should also feel free to speak out against Israel and also make that distinction. Say that I have a lot of respect for the Jewish people, for that culture, but what Israel is doing is abhorrent, and it has nothing to do with being Jewish, because believe it or not, as Jews, we are raised to think of, being slaves in Egypt and of being kind to your neighbors. And this is taught to us a lot. You wouldn't know it by looking at Israel, but these same moral aspects are taught to us just as they are taught to the other two major religions and others outside of them. So I think it's very important that the left continue to speak out about the Israeli government and how it actually goes against a lot of the teachings inside of the Jewish culture, and while at the same time being very clear that anti-Semitism, actual anti-Semitism, is unacceptable. And just for the record, Palestinians are also Semites.
Imagine, yes.
Actually, not even a correct phrase. It should be anti-Jewish, if that's your specific thing. But yeah, so I think that we have to be very open about speaking about Israel for what they are, and at the same time standing against the rise of fascism and standing for our Jewish brothers and sisters as well.
Now, in regards to an apartheid state, can there be a Jewish state that's not an apartheid state?
I don't believe that there can, because if you base something on somebody's identity in that way, then you are excluding people based on something that they cannot change. And that is an apartheid. It's similar to what we saw in South Africa. You can't change the fact that, you can change your religion, but the Jewish culture is something that is part of our identity. Just like in South Africa, you can't change your race, even though that too is a construct. So if your apartheid state is built on somebody's identity that they are unwilling or unable to change, then no, it has to be a secular state.
So what's the solution?
There are conversations about having a two-state solution, but
that still means one state is apartheid, right?
Basically, it would mean that there's an Israeli state and a Palestinian state, yes. But the other thing is that there are Christians and there are Muslims that live inside of Israel. Mm-hmm. And so I think that we have to be clear that this is something that could work. It just can't be called a Jewish state. So I don't know. I kind of go back and forth with what the solution is. I can tell you what's not the solution is Jared Kushner's peace plan. But I think that honestly, I think the solution is just like the solution is anywhere else in the world. It's letting the people who are most affected and most marginalized have a strong voice and a seat at the table, and the right to return to their homes that were stolen from them when Israel was just created out of thin air. I think that Palestinians, just like any other oppressed people, have the right to exist without being oppressed, without being subject to the largest open-air prison, and without being subjected to genocide. So I think that it has to be a piece of the puzzle, regardless of which way we go.
Great. Well, last question, and then and this one goes now to Elizabeth Warren. I noticed not once in our conversation, and I wondered why. I didn't understand why. Not once did you mention her.
So I'm going to start my answer kind of in a weird way. It's a book that I found that Elizabeth Warren contributed to. Mm-hmm. It's called Pow Wow Chow. And it is recipes from the, quote, 5 civilized tribes.
Okay.
Maybe the others are wild. And it's recipes from people who are supposedly Native American, including Elizabeth Warren, who came up with a Cherokee recipe, which in fact she stole from a French cookbook. To me, that sums up her political career and her ethos perfectly. Mm-hmm. She wants to seem like the absolute progressive, but deep down, she is not what her facade preaches. And you can see that in her political career. And of course, I believe that people have the ability and the right to change their perspectives. But let me give you another example. When Mad Dog Mattis was being questioned by the Senate as to whether he could take his post, and she had 5 minutes to question him, the question she chose to ask was, "Are you for innovation?" That is the question that she asked Mad Dog Mattis.
Who was going for yeah. Okay.
So let's be honest, Elizabeth Warren, and I've talked about this in an article that I wrote not too long ago about the greenwashing of the military, the idea that we could somehow greenify our military when it is the single largest consumer of fossil fuels in the entire world, equal to 140 countries, also burns the most. Most of our military bases around the world and at home are Superfund sites. They're absolutely toxic and not being cleaned up. Let's be very honest, you can't have a green war. And Elizabeth Warren is very pro the idea of somehow making our wars more eco-friendly so we can bomb innocent civilians with, I guess, a reusable water bottle. I don't know. But she is a war hawk. She is very disingenuous when it comes to the marginalized peoples whose flag she wants to fly while not assisting them in any way, shape, or form. She has not been there for missing and murdered Indigenous women. She has not been there for the pipeline projects that are crossing through her quote-unquote ancestral lands. She just hasn't been there. And these new ideas of hers that, like the antitrust and breaking up people like Facebook, that's great, but it's a newfound idea that she had. It's also not her original idea. And it's very reminiscent of the hope and change that Obama talked about. And I didn't get any hope and change.
The hope, but the change never came, right?
Yeah, no, it never came. So I think that, to me, Warren, and there have been reports that she's been meeting closely with Hillary Clinton. So I think that the Democrats are actually, if push comes to shove, they will absolutely step away from Biden. And then they want to have somebody like Elizabeth Warren who knows how to play the game and can talk that talk just like Obama did, waiting in the wings. And I fear that is where we're headed.
So let me ask. Well, I do think that's where we are. And to put it worse, I think, and I'm going a little over. I hope you have a few more minutes. Just okay. Here's the thing. I think you're right. I think that is exactly where we're going, especially given that now Bernie Sanders may have a bit of issues, whether real or not. Mm-hmm. Okay. So my question to you is, because I think I have already made peace with helping the activist crew. The truth of the matter is, I don't care about personalities, and I don't care about politicians. What I think we as people, as activists, are to do are to force empty vessels to perform. That's my thought. I'd love to hear yours, frankly. But my thing is, I thought we should have held, and by the way, I was guilty as well, but I thought we should have held Obama to his words, and not holding him to his words or giving him a pass allowed him to do what he did. Okay? My thing is, whoever we were to pick, can we hold, assuming that we like their words, can we hold them to their words? Force the empty vessels to perform.
Well, I think that there's a lot in that people sort of stepped back once Obama and, of course, both houses of Congress went Democrat. I think a lot of people just kind of sat back on those laurels. But I also think that there's a systemic issue here that unfortunately makes our job harder, right? Mm-hmm. I think Margaret Kimberly, who's a writer for the Black Agenda Report, put it really well when I spoke with her about this, and she said, I'm one of the few Black people I knew that didn't want a Black president because I know what you have to do to become a president. You have to turn your back on your people.
Right.
And it's the same reason that I don't want a female CEO of Lockheed Martin. Oh, great. So it's a woman bombing women and children. What do you do? Like, that doesn't make me proud as a woman. So I think it's important that we recognize what one has to do in order to become president in this system. And that is making those promises to Wall Street. That is making those promises to the military industrial complex and the fossil fuel giants. And I think that, yes, we should work to hold people that are in office to account and let people, like the Ocasio-Cortezes know that we have their back, that we're supporting them. We should absolutely be doing that. But there is a deeper systemic rot here, and that we have to recognize, because there's a lot that people say that they're going to do. And even if there's a piece of Obama, which I don't know, but even if there's a piece of Obama that really did want that hope and change, I think that the forces pushing him on a daily basis to bomb more, to backpedal on the Medicare for all idea, those forces are stronger and way more rich than we are. And we have to recognize that systemic issue and work to change the system, not just that, empty vessel that you mentioned.
I agree with that. I mean, I speak a lot about the president and the presidency being very, very different. And I think you're right. It's a systemic change that we need. And how do we start to get to that systemic change, barring some sort of a war?
I know that's a very tricky question, and it's a heavy question that I've talked about it with veteran friends of mine as well, who say that if there was some sort of revolution in the United States, it would be atrocious, because we do have the world's largest military, and not everyone would side with the people. I think that that's a very scary eventuality, and it's one that I would never want to see. I hope it never happens. I think there are ways of getting that systemic change without there being that level of violence, but I think realistically, we have to talk about then, in my opinion, we have to talk about whether the United States as an entity can and should survive. When the United States was first created, the idea of going all the way to the West Coast was considered a way to divide and conquer the people. It was even put that way. Divide et impera, quoting the Roman emperors themselves, with this idea of having an empire that is that vast with that many people. How do you create a movement? Because the realities of somebody living in the swamps of Louisiana is not the reality that I live in, or folks in the Pacific Northwest. There's no American experience in that way.
Right.
So I think that something that we should actually think about is how we can build power locally and on the state level. And perhaps soon that will reach to some sort of questioning as to what the federal government actually does for us. And I'm not a libertarian with this idea, but I think that that's a valid question that needs to be asked. And, we already see this with California has played with this idea, and I think that they should continue to, because recently the Trump administration said that the EPA said that they couldn't have stricter air quality laws. Well, excuse me, but screw you. We want stricter air quality laws. Mm-hmm. And I think that the federal government imposing their will on a state that is 3,000 miles away doesn't make any sense, because they don't have to live there. Exactly. And I think that the idea of the governed and the governors living in that same space, having to share that space, that has a lot of weight. And I think that sort of question is something that we should definitely play with.
And I'm going to close there. That is profound. Eleanor Goldfield, creative activist, poet, writer, journalist, singer, dissident at artkillingapathy.com, and the host of the Act Now on Speech TV. It's Act Now, right?
Act Out.
Act Out. Oh boy. Here I go again.
But also Act Now.
Yeah, exactly. You should act now. That was Eleanor. Eleanor, you have a quick closer.
Well, thank you so much, Roberto. I really appreciate you having me on. Again, all of my work can be found via artkillingapathy.com. And as I'll quote Richard Wolff here, this is a conversation, not me just talking at you. So please reach out. And thank you, as always, for your work and having me on.
Thank you so kindly, Eleanor. And remember, her Twitter is @activist Eleanor. Have a wonderful day.
You too. Thank you.